Thomas Parker was known throughout the city of Springfield as the philanthropist with the golden touch. At 45 years old, he had built an empire in the technology sector, transforming a small business started in a suburban garage into a corporation, valued at billions of dollars, employing more than 5,000 people. His path to the top had been marked by smart decisions, perfect timing, and, as he always made a point of emphasizing, divine blessings I don't deserve. But what impressed people the most wasn't his extraordinary financial success, it was his seemingly inexhaustible generosity. Every Sunday, without fail, Thomas sat in the front row of the Springfield Community Church, where he not only contributed generously to every project, but also personally coordinated social initiatives, homeless shelters, educational programs in underprivileged neighborhoods, and international missions to regions devastated by natural disasters. "God has blessed me so I can bless others," he often said whenever someone praised his philanthropy, a motto that had practically become his signature in the business community. "I'm just a channel for resources that don't really belong to me." His spacious office at Parker Technologies was decorated with carefully framed Bible verses, the most prominent of them, "To whom much is given, much will be required," displayed prominently right behind his desk. He began every board meeting with a brief prayer, something uncommon in the tech industry, but which his employees and business partners had learned to respect, regardless of their own beliefs. To Thomas, faith and business weren't separate spheres, but rather inseparable aspects of a life well lived. Beyond business and charity, Thomas had a passion few would associate with a successful executive: adventure in its purest, most challenging form. Rock climbing, skydiving, Class 5 whitewater rafting, cave diving. The riskier and more technically demanding, the better. He had conquered Everest at 38, crossed the Sahara Desert alone at 40, and completed the Ironman triathlon 3 times in a row. His trophy room at home showcased photos of him in some of the most dangerous and awe-inspiring environments on the planet. "Life is a gift from God," he often told his best friend from college, Michael Wilson, during their expeditions around the world. "Every racing heartbeat, every breathless moment when we're hanging hundreds of meters up on a sheer cliff, it's all a sacred reminder of how blessed we are to exist in this incredible world." For Thomas, these moments of extreme physical challenge were almost religious experiences, deep connections with divine creation that perfectly complemented his structured faith within the church. It was during one of these adventures, an ambitious climbing expedition on the western face of Mount McKinley in the Rocky Mountains, a route only a handful of the world's best climbers had ever successfully completed, that everything changed irrevocably. Thomas was leading a small group of experienced climbers, along with a promising newcomer, Kevin, the son of one of his senior executives, when an unexpected storm hit. Defying even the most advanced weather forecasts they had consulted before the climb, the sky darkened within minutes, and winds of over 60 mph began lashing the mountain's exposed face. Thomas, demonstrating the leadership that had made him legendary both in business and on the mountains, immediately devised an evacuation plan to a sheltered ledge about 30 meters below. Trying to protect Kevin, who had frozen in fear on the increasingly slippery rock face, Thomas strategically positioned himself to hold onto the boy's safety rope. That's when it happened. A lightning strike, blinding, deafening, and merciless, hit the mountain face just a few feet above them. The rock, already unstable from the heavy rains in the previous days, shattered with a thunderous crack that seemed to shake the entire mountain. Within seconds, tons of stone came crashing down toward the climbers. Thomas woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Denver. Michael was at his side, his eyes red from crying. "We got you out of there, Tom." But Michael couldn't finish. Thomas felt a strange emptiness. When he looked down, he saw the bandage where his right arm should have been, ending abruptly just below the elbow. The hand that signed checks for charity, the hand he raised in praise at church, the hand that held firm during his adventures, it was gone. They had to amputate it due to the severity of the injuries. During the following weeks, Thomas received visits from pastors, church members, and beneficiaries of his charitable work. They all offered the same comforting phrases: God writes straight with crooked lines. All things work together for the good of those who love God. There's a purpose in this that we can't see yet. At first, Thomas tried to hold on to his faith, but as weeks turned into months, the physical pain gave way to a growing bitterness. The advanced prosthetics his wealth could afford didn't replace what he had lost. The recurring nightmares, where he relived the accident over and over, left him exhausted and irritable. 6 months after the accident, Thomas no longer attended church. His charitable donations had ceased. His office walls were stripped of their framed Bible quotes. When Pastor Johnson came to visit him at his mansion, Thomas greeted him with a glass of whiskey in his remaining hand. "So, you came to tell me that your God has a wonderful plan for me?" he asked sarcastically, raising his amputated arm. "How about explaining what divine plan involves taking the hand of a man who dedicated his life to helping others in his name?" "Thomas, I know you're hurting, but—" "No, you don't," Thomas interrupted. "Your almighty God could have diverted those rocks. He could have guided the doctor's hands to save my arm, but he didn't. So please spare me the cliches and religious platitudes." The pastor left with his head bowed, and Thomas ordered his staff not to allow any more visits from fairy tale representatives. In the years that followed, Thomas Parker became known for his bitterness as much as he had once been for his generosity. Whenever he heard someone mention God or faith, he openly mocked them. He began funding atheist organizations and attending debates where he ridiculed religion. His company thrived, but everyone noticed how the joy had vanished from his eyes. "God writes straight with crooked lines?" he scoffed during a charity dinner 5 years after the accident. "Then he must be a terrible writer, because all I see are crooked lines leading nowhere. You pray to a cosmic dictator while I live in the real world." Michael, who had remained his friend despite everything, watched with sadness. "Tom, you may not believe anymore, but that doesn't mean you have to be cruel to those who do. Cruelty is believing in an omnipotent being who could prevent suffering, but chooses not to," Thomas replied coldly. "I'm just pointing out the obvious." It was the following summer when Thomas decided to return to the mountains for the first time since the accident. Not to climb. That was impossible now. But for a corporate event at a luxury resort in Aspen. After a day of meetings, he decided to take a solitary walk along a nearby trail. The trail followed the edge of a cliff, offering breathtaking views of the valley below. Thomas walked, lost in thought, when he heard a scream. Looking down, he saw a girl, no older than 12, dangling precariously from a narrow ledge a few feet below the trail. She had clearly wandered off the path and slipped. "Help! Please help me!" the girl cried, her hands desperately clinging to exposed roots that could give way at any moment. Thomas dropped to the edge of the cliff, extending his left arm. "Grab my hand," he shouted. "I can't reach." The girl sobbed, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. Thomas stretched further, dangerously close to the edge. With effort, the girl managed to grasp his hand. With a strong pull, he hauled her to the safety of the trail. As they both caught their breath, Thomas noticed something that made his blood run cold. The girl wore a medical alert bracelet. Severe type 1 diabetes. "What's your name?" Thomas asked. "Emily," the girl replied, still trembling. "Emily Johnson. Johnson, are you Pastor Johnson's daughter?" Emily nodded, looking at him curiously. "You know my dad?" Before Thomas could respond, they heard voices calling the girl's name. Moments later, Pastor Johnson appeared on the trail, his face a mixture of relief and shock upon seeing Thomas. "Emily, thank God!" he exclaimed, embracing his daughter. Then, looking at Thomas, "Thomas, you saved her?" Thomas nodded uncomfortably, suddenly aware of the irony of the situation. Later that night, Pastor Johnson appeared at Thomas's hotel room. "I came to thank you in person," the pastor said. "The doctors said that if Emily had been lost any longer, with her condition, well, you literally saved her life." Thomas waved it off. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't just anyone, it was you," the pastor insisted. "And do you know what's extraordinary? If you had both hands." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked, frowning. The ledge where Emily was trapped, It's too narrow for someone to climb down safely. If you had tried to reach her with both hands, you probably would have fallen too. But because you only had one hand to extend, you had to position yourself differently in a way that, according to the park rangers I spoke with, was much safer. A chill ran down Thomas's spine, followed by a strange sensation, as if the world around him had momentarily stopped. The pastor's words echoed in his mind, challenging 5 years of carefully cultivated bitterness. "I'm not saying I know why things happen, Thomas," the pastor continued gently, his eyes revealing a mix of gratitude and a deep sorrow Thomas had never noticed before. "I've lost a lot too. My wife, Sarah, died suddenly from a brain aneurysm when Emily was just 2 years old. No warning, no time for goodbyes, no clear medical explanation. I spent sleepless nights holding my little girl as she cried for her mother, questioning God with every tear we shed. I questioned His existence, His goodness, His justice. I questioned every single day. I still do." The pastor paused, looking out the window at the mountains that had nearly taken his daughter's life, and years ago, Thomas's hand. But today, well, today I can't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, there's something greater at work than we can comprehend with our limited minds. Not some simplistic explanation that everything happens for a reason, but a complex tapestry, where every thread, even the darkest ones, contributes to a pattern that can only be seen from a distance. After the pastor left, Thomas lay awake all night replaying the events in his mind. If he had both hands, if he hadn't been in that exact place at that exact moment, if his bitterness had stopped him from helping the daughter of a man he had despised. The next morning, Thomas drove to a small chapel nearby. It was empty except for an elderly woman arranging flowers at the altar. He sat in the last pew, staring at the crucifix on the front wall. "I guess you and I have some unfinished conversations," he murmured. There was no instant conversion, no heavenly lights or angelic choirs, but something had shifted. A small crack had formed in the wall of bitterness he had built around his heart. In the weeks that followed, Thomas began to re-examine his life. He reread books on faith that he had long discarded. He met with Pastor Johnson for long conversations, not mocking, but genuinely questioning, searching for understanding. 6 months later, Parker Technologies launched a new division, Cutting Edge, assistive technology for people with physical disabilities, at affordable prices. Thomas donated half of his fortune to establish a foundation dedicated to medical research and trauma survivor assistance. At the inauguration ceremony of the Parker Comprehensive Rehabilitation and Research Center, a state-of-the-art, 50-bed facility dedicated to severe trauma and amputation victims, Thomas slowly stepped onto the stage. The auditorium was packed. Healthcare executives, journalists, celebrities, politicians, and most importantly, dozens of people with physical disabilities similar to his. Beside the stage, a massive covered plaque awaited its unveiling. The audience, familiar with his reputation from recent years, expected to see the same cynical, bitter businessman who had become notorious for his sharp comments about religion and his ruthless success in business. Instead, under the stage lights, they saw a man visibly transformed, not just in his outward appearance, leaner and with prematurely graying hair, but in something deeper that radiated from his eyes, something that many would later describe simply as peace. "I lost my right hand 6 years ago," Thomas began, his voice initially low but gaining strength as he spoke. He raised his prosthetic arm, not a utilitarian model, but neither one of the ostentatiously expensive ones he could have easily afforded. "And with it, I lost much more than just a physical appendage. I lost my faith, which had been the foundation of my life for over 4 decades. I lost my compassion, which had given meaning to my material success. I lost my connection to the community that had supported me from the very beginning, and perhaps most devastating of all, I nearly lost my humanity completely." He paused, scanning the auditorium, recognizing faces of people he had pushed away during his darkest years. "For years, 5 years to be exact, I openly mocked those. Who spoke of divine purpose or meaning in suffering? I ridiculed people of faith, including many of you here today. I used my platform, my influence, and my wealth to discredit the idea of a God who cares about human suffering. Was I right to do so? Am I right now as I reconsider these positions? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe I never will. Doubt, I've come to realize, is not the enemy of faith, but perhaps its most honest companion. Thomas paused meaningfully, glancing at his prosthetic arm, flexing the artificial fingers in a motion that, even after years of practice and the best technology available, still felt slightly awkward. But I have learned something profoundly important on this journey through darkness, something I never would have understood had I not walked through the valley of bitterness and gradually found my way back into the light. His voice wavered, slightly before steadying again. Sometimes, it is precisely our wounds, our broken parts, our irreparable losses, our visible and invisible scars, our crooked lines, as my grandmother used to say, that allow us to connect with others in ways we never could if we were whole and perfect. Sometimes it is exactly our limitations that enable us to reach someone who would otherwise remain beyond our grasp. Sometimes, paradoxically, it is our own incompleteness that saves us and allows us to save others. In the front row, Pastor Johnson nodded silently, tears in his eyes reflecting the stage lights. Emily, now a healthy and vibrant teenager, sat beside him, holding her father's hand tightly. Her medical alert bracelet was still visible on her wrist, a constant reminder of both life's fragility and its preciousness. I'm not here to preach religion or to claim that I've found all the answers, Thomas continued, his voice now carrying a blend of humility and conviction. I'm not here to say that I fully understand the divine plan or that my story proves the existence of God beyond doubt. I'm simply here to acknowledge with humility that maybe, just maybe, there is more to this life, to this universe, than what I can see, touch, measure, or comprehend with my limited mind. That maybe there is a greater purpose weaving together the seemingly random events of our lives, even when I can't discern it clearly. And that maybe, when all is said and done, when we look back on the grand tapestry of our lives, we will discover that even our greatest losses, our sharpest pains, our darkest nights, hold within them the seeds of something profoundly meaningful and unexpectedly beautiful. Thomas then gestured toward the covered plaque, and two young people, Kevin, the novice climber he had saved on the mountain at the cost of his hand, and Emily Johnson, stepped onto the stage to unveil it together. When the fabric fell away, it revealed not just the name of the center, but also its motto, inscribed in golden letters beneath the logo: "Through crooked lines, paths of healing." As thunderous applause filled the auditorium, silent tears streamed down the faces of many in the audience. Thomas Parker remained at the center of the stage, feeling a deep peace he had not experienced in years, perhaps one he had never truly known, even in the days of his unquestioned faith. He didn't have all the answers. He still wrestled with doubt every day, but he had learned something infinitely more valuable: how to live in the creative tension between what he had lost and what he had gained, between the known and the mystery. And in that space, that sacred space between honest questioning and humble acceptance, between undeniable pain and emerging purpose, between the hand he had lost and the lives that loss had, indirectly, allowed him to touch, he found something he thought he had lost forever. Something more precious than any material wealth or professional success: hope. A hope not based on absolute certainties or promises of perfection, but rooted in the possibility of meaning, even in life's imperfections and its crooked lines.